US-China relations will go through a long period of testing. The Americans once supported the induction of China into the global system. I was there when China joined the WTO in Doha in November 2001. But since then, till the beginning of COVID, China's economy grew 7 times in real terms, 9 times in RMB, 11 times in US dollar terms. And there's a certain bias remorse in the US that they should not have helped China because China has now become too big and threatens US dominance in the world. This plus growing US and to some extent Western insecurity about the evolution of its own society is an important reason why between US and China there's going to be a fairly long period of tension, oscillating between sometimes a cold peace to a cold war. Proxy conflicts could be in Southeast Asia, could be in Myanmar, could be elsewhere. But America worrying that China will one day displace it as global hegemon. If China were like the old Soviet Union, then such a fear is warranted. Then the lessons of the Peloponnesian War, the Thucydides trap, becomes relevant. But China is in fact of a different nature. And while understanding the Greeks give one an important window into the evolution of Western society, the understanding of East Asian society requires a different window, and it is a window into the rise and fall of China. China is unique because it is unusually homogeneous. For a population of 1.4 billion, it is 93% Han. For a population over twice that of Europe, the Chinese have one literature, one written language, one set of heroes. Here in Europe, every few hundred kilometers, a different history, a different terroir, different heroes, a different sense of itself. In China, yes, there are regional differences. Yes, the spoken language is often not mutually intelligible, but the high language, which is written, and the histories, which are well written, the heroes are all common. So it's an unusually homogeneous society. And this homogeneity is not happenstance. It's not the result of the whim of a leader or a set of policies. It's in the DNA of the culture and civilization. In reality, the Chinese prefer living in a society which is mostly Chinese. And every time there's a crisis, they will impose controls, like during COVID. The Chinese may complain, but they will comply. But the non-Chinese will not be able to take it and they leave. And to some extent, China welcomes them leaving. Then it can batten the hatches, pull up the drawbridges, shut the gates, and preserve itself. You know, dynasty after dynasty rebuilt the Great Wall. The Great Wall that we see, which is on Instagram, that's only a fossil. Because that Great Wall was always a living system. Not just bricks, but a whole system of control, which went beyond the Great Wall, outside and inside. If you are in a watchtower and you are asleep and did not warn people further down the wall or inside the wall, you'll be executed. Because it was something life and death. When times are calm, when there's no threat, then the gates are flung open and people move in and out freely. But if there's danger, then the controls are put in place. The surveillance network is activated, far beyond and deep within, including the deployment of reserve forces. We saw this during COVID. They locked up the population in compartments, into cells, and then, one by one, resolve the problem within. The Western media would have us believe that China did badly during COVID. China, in fact, did extremely well during COVID. As any epidemiologist knows, in an epidemic, be the last to open up. Don't be the first. So China had the fewest deaths per million. And because within the country they had closed-loop production, well, the rest of us were at home, avoiding one another, working or pretending to work on our terminals, still collecting our salaries, and every day waiting for the delivery man to bring in parcels. And sometimes wondering who ordered what within the family. Who made the stuff inside the parcels? They all came from China. All the ships went to China to collect manufacturers. They left full, they returned empty. Now, I was in logistics for a number of years. Freight rate across the Pacific is usually between $1,000 to $2,000. It kept on going up. When it reached 5,000, the instruction to the ships was, don't wait for the containers to be unloaded. Leave the containers there. Ship comes back. Because each container costs only about $2,000. And that cost was then described as a supply chain crisis. During those few years, China's merchandise trade surplus broke all records. In 2020, China's merchandise trade surplus was $530 billion. In 2021, it reached $670 billion. In 2022, when all we read about was the pain felt by Shanghainese as a result of the sudden lockdown, the trade surplus went up to $850 billion. And last year it was about the same. When they finally opened up, and they had a car show in Shanghai, Western and Japanese car manufacturers were shocked. Because while they were marking time at home, China pressed on. And today, the EVs dominate the world market. They are by far the biggest maker of cars in the world, and I think has become the biggest exporter of cars in the world, certainly of electric vehicles. My point is, Chinese homogeneity in certain situations is a great strength. But when that highly centralized, internally synchronized system breaks down, when that huge machine gets stuck, its discomfiture goes on for a very long time. And this is the reason for the long cycles of Chinese history. A key reason for this, in my view, which I talk about in my book, is paper. The Chinese had a monopoly of paper for many centuries. Paper allows more data storage and allows more data processing than parchment or papyrus or palm fronds or whatever. The Chinese had paper in vast amounts for centuries, kept it a secret. When you can capture and process so much data, you can organize more human beings. The more processing capability in data, the more human beings you can organize. And because of this technology and monopoly, Chinese society created a centralized system which no other ethnic group in the world was able to. And that gives China its particular character. When the Chinese say, we have no imperial desires because this is not in our nature, it is true. Because if you conquer, say like the British did India or other parts of the world, you now have to organize people not like yourself, and whose cultures you're not always able to digest. But in the case of the Chinese, if they stick among Chinese people, it's much easier. Which is why the Americans are mistaken if they think that when the Chinese economy grows, that its behavior will be like that of a Western imperial power or like itself. This cannot be established mathematically, so it has to be established by practice. It may take some time, maybe 20, 30 years, before the Americans are finally convinced that this is the nature of China. This is not Russia. This is not Britain. This is not France. This is not Germany. During this period of tension, as moves are made against one another, business people feel very uncomfortable because they're subject to tariffs, surveillance, all kinds of controls. So many are moving to Southeast Asia. European companies, American companies, Japanese companies, and Chinese companies. And often they indigenize themselves. They become Singaporean or Malaysian or Indonesian by changing their passports. And even in Italy, outside Florence, in Pardo, Wenzhou people, they become Italian, many are Catholics. And when we buy the necktie or the handbag, it says made in Italy, but it's actually made by Wenzhou people in Italy. It's a different pattern. In Africa, there's intermarriage going on. And the Chinese are not like the old colonial powers, living on high hills and being served by retinues of servants. They are there riding bicycles, setting up small shops, peddling their wares. Of course, they're also the big businessmen. So this rise of China is a new phenomenon. I sometimes describe it as another sun entering the solar system, causing the gravitational field in which all of us find our orbit being distorted. And this new sun will be bigger than the existing sun. I mean, think about it. China has 4 times the population of the US. As Elon Musk said, it's arithmetic. By the time China's per capita GDP reaches half that of the US, its economy will be twice that of the US. And the average Chinese is not half as productive as the average American. They're pretty hardworking. And if they achieve a per capita GDP more than half, then China's economy may well be the size of the US, EU, and Japan combined. So this is a huge phenomenon. Every heavenly body's orbit will be affected. Make a mistake, you may crash into something bigger. Understanding the forces, you will achieve new orbital freedom, which you could never have dreamt of before. Therefore, understanding the phenomenon of China, and it's a huge phenomenon, and it's a complex phenomenon, is extremely important. And in Southeast Asia, because we have seen China in these previous incarnations, there is almost an instinct as to how to deal with that China. And if we in ASEAN, which is the association of the 10 countries of Southeast Asia. If we play our cards right, we will play the role of a stabilizing force between the US and China, China and India, where everybody feels comfortable. And we ourselves benefiting from both the cooperation and the contention.
What do you guys think? Do you guys think is he right that China hegemony is not like the West? Please leave your comment below. We would love to hear from you.
Thank you for making it this far. If you like this video, you might want to share it with a like-minded friend. Thank you, and as always, stay blessed.